The name's Nat, and every Thursday we do enlightening webinars on neurodiversity, picking a new subject to deep dive on. Today we are going for dyspraxia. We have already looked at dyslexia, autism, ADHD in midlife onwards, but we've not looked at dyspraxia. Why haven't we looked at dyspraxia? The main reason is the lack of research and a lack of data on this very subject. You have people who have no idea they have dyspraxia, and then when they get to a certain point in life, suddenly these challenges that came out of seemingly nowhere appear. You will always have dyspraxia, but it may have not been as noticeable. Today, we are focusing on dyspraxia, but we will be mentioning ADHD maybe more than you realize, because there seems to be way more research on ADHD, and a lot of the characteristics that relate to dyspraxia are also prevalent in ADHD. If you ever see a little bit of overlap, that's predominantly why. Here's me with dyspraxia. You can't see the dyspraxia on me, but I promise you it's there. Here's our lovely team. You got me and April again today. The last webinar we did was predominantly inattentive ADHD. We know there are 3 types of ADHD, or ways it presents itself: hyperactive, inattentive, and combined. Now, inattentive is the most mysterious one of them all because it's the one that draws the least attention. Do check out our YouTube. We have a whole heap of webinars, and look, there's me. I've now cut the background out because I learned how to do that, which was quite fun. We've got to 5,000 the other day. Very happy day. Some terms just to make sure we're all on the same page here, because I appreciate there's going to be terms that you've never heard of. Adult dyspraxia. And now what you mean? Is that even a term? A lot of people don't even know that you can have dyspraxia in adulthood. It is a lifelong condition. You absolutely can. If any of you are thinking, where has it been for the last 40 odd years? It was there. It was probably missed because it does tend to be a more passive kind of condition compared to those with, say, ADHD or autism. Okay, another one, motor skills. This is one of the primary characteristics of dyspraxia: difficulty with movement and coordination. When we think of falling over, bumping your head, struggling with buttons, tying your shoes, even speech, these are typical characteristics of dyspraxia. Then you got planning issues, trouble with organizing and completing tasks. This tends to be more obvious in adults because we are doing more planning and more organizing. Yet the motor skills, which is what people normally think of when they think of dyspraxia, is less pronounced because probably we're all couch potatoes and we're not moving much. If we were, then we might notice more challenges. Realistically, I think it's because you're still learning your body when you're younger, and it takes those with dyspraxia a little bit longer. Then we got sensory sensitivities, over or under reactivity to senses. I know what you're saying. Now, I thought that was all to do with autism. Dyspraxia as well. You will see that there are a lot of overlaps between the whole spectrum of neurodiversity. So it's not a contradiction, it's just part of it. Comorbidity, it's knowing that there are a lot of conditions which overlap with dyspraxia, such as autism, ADHD, anxiety, a whole heap. Dyslexia really commonly go together. They're different diagnoses, but they do commonly go together. Then we've got occupational therapy. This is something which you always hear for children. Oh, they got a bloody developmental disorder, don't they? Send them to OT. Adults can still have occupational therapy. These are just people that can help you with tasks, strengths that are associated with dyspraxia, rather than predominantly focusing on the negatives. Spatial awareness, this is your understanding of 3D space and how you maneuver it. But you'll see that there might be a bit of a contradiction here because on one hand, you may struggle with spatial awareness, but it can also be a skill set. You can see how some things, they're different per person. And time management, which again goes into organization, very much relates to ADHD, dysgraphia, they're all interconnected. Oh, Ellie says my house is not dyspraxia friendly. The second I'm in a bit of a rush, I run into a ledge and severely injured my toe again. Oh God, this is going to be like a therapy group for people, isn't it? Who has a bruise on them today? Okay, yeah, probably a few. Now, while, don't get me wrong, the bruises are a very real thing, it's really important to remember the wider picture as well. Otherwise, we're playing into the negative stereotype. Stereotypes are there for a purpose. They're not made out of nothing, but there's more to the story. I had a little bit of fun on Canva the other day and started making my own graphics. This is what I made. And it shows you that there are a lot of strengths that are also associated with dyspraxia. The question here is, are they inherently part of the condition, or do they come about from living with the condition? It's a mixture, really. Perseverance, probably living with, empathy, maybe skills, resilience. It depends. Now, it's never worth saying it's all sunshine and rainbows or it's all doom and gloom. It's a bit of mixture. And this is why we'll go over the whole sphere. So we are all on the same page, because I went right into this without really explaining what dyspraxia is. According to the old NHS, they're not great at timekeeping, but they're pretty trustworthy. They say dyspraxia, also known as developmental coordination disorder, DCD, is a common disorder that affects movement and coordination. So remember, movement and coordination can also be verbal. Fine motor skills, like picking up things and like buttons. Then you've got your gross motor skills, which are like big movements. Dyspraxia does not affect your intelligence. Really important one to know. It can affect your coordination skills, such as tasks requiring balance. So now that we know what it is, we also know that it's relatively common. Out of 100 people, approximately about 4 probably will have dyspraxia. For adults, it's about like 2.6. Why? I think that comes down to people reporting it, because again, it doesn't disappear. Yeah, there's a lot that goes with it. The big question is, what actually happens as you get older? Does dyspraxia get better? Does it get worse? Does it disappear? Does it evolve into a Charizard? Who knows? We do. And it is with us our entire life. Some of the key challenges which come along with it is coordination. This is your kind of depth perception, you being able to respond to things. You've got your speech, not always being able to get the words out. Quite often, it's like on the tip of your tongue. You've got the knowledge up here, it's just not coming out effectively. Fine motor skills is essentially being able to use your hands and being able to pick things up. This could be using scissors, it could be shoelaces, buttons, anything along those things. Then we've got sensory processing. This is when you have too much information at once. Maybe it's too much light, sound, smells, like any sort of sense. And this is when you can get easily overwhelmed. Organization, being able to plan things out, to mentally map your direction of what you need to do in a day. The gross motor skills, like catching a ball, definitely a bit of a ball magnet, not ideal. Social interactions, because it may take you a little bit longer to form your sentences, you may struggle with being as quick-witted or fast to react. As such, it can impact being able to make friends. And spatial awareness, bumping. It might mean that things you think are nearer than they are or further away than they are. We've got lots of different things that all go into a diagnosis. It's worth noting, you don't have to have all of these to in a debilitating state in order to be diagnosed with dyspraxia. You just have to have a few of these that affect you to a medium to severe level on a continuous basis. You will probably have some of these to some form or another. If you're thinking, wow, I've got all of these, that still doesn't mean you have dyspraxia, but you definitely have characteristics. You'll see like ADHD had a lot of these, dyslexia has a lot of these, but they won't have the exact kind of like bingo sheet. A question just so I get a feel of the room, dyspraxia, do you have it? Yes or no? And if you are self-diagnosed, you might as well say yes anyway. It wouldn't let me have a third option. This little diagram I made shows you the 3 components. In order to be eligible, I guess, to have dyspraxia, you've got to have consistent challenges on an ongoing basis with motor coordination, challenges with planning and organization, and difficulties with sensory processing. We all have these things from time to time, but if we have all of them together and they are interfering with our day-to-day life, that is when we may want to seek out a second opinion on dyspraxia. Some topics we're going to look at, if successful, is about late diagnosis and its implications. Is it worse to get diagnosed as an adult? If you do get diagnosed later on, what are you even going to do with that? Knowing that even though it may not seem it, ongoing support is often required. Emotional and social economic impact, and we've already briefly touched upon that today, but getting employment, staying in employment can be extra difficult and give you a bit of a financial hit. Also, when you get diagnosed, what are you going to do with that information? Praxis is a Greek word, and it's part of dyspraxia. That's where it came from. Dys, simply means difficulty with processes. That is what we mean by dyspraxia. And when you break it down, difficulty with processing is actually a better name than what we think it is. We think it's just about movement. Processing could be anything. When we break it down, you've got ideation. You might find it difficult of thinking to come up with ideas on the spot, being able to take multiple sources, join them together in order to create something new. Then you've got the challenge with planning, being able to, all right, we've got an idea now. What are the steps I need to do in order to get to the final destination? And lastly, the execution. You might have all the information you need, but getting to the finish line can be a bit of a hurdle. All of this kind of accumulates to one part of dyspraxia. I think that's the main case here, because again, for adults, the stereotype of dyspraxia just doesn't really relate to how it presents itself for most of us on a day-to-day. How does dyspraxia change throughout your life? When you're a toddler, and the toddler word apparently comes from the fact that you toddle around on the floor. I think about 2 to 3. It can take longer to learn basic movements like walking. You might be a little bit delayed at walking. Now, this was definitely true for me. I was always wobbling around. I crawled for a lot longer than you would imagine, and trouble dressing and playing with toys. Now, I don't know how you have trouble playing with toys. Maybe if there's a correct way to play with them, but just let your kid do whatever they want. These are things that most people will be like, maybe I should get them looked at. And when they're a child, this is when most people get diagnosed. And it'll be like writing, using scissors, things that require multiple processes in order to have one outcome. For writing, you've got to be holding a pen. A lot of us hold things way too tight because we struggle with pressure. Then you've also got the movement, and you've also got the thinking of what you're writing. You can see it's all of these things. Well, we said about having too much information at once, that's what results in the difficulty. We've got school and making friends. Like we said, it is an unintended outcome of dyspraxia, not inherently part of it, but you can't really separate the two. Then moving into adulthood, this is where a lot of us drop off a cliff because nobody's busy looking for dyspraxia. It's only if you are really struggling and you've looked in all other areas where you eventually might double and then start asking those questions. Madonna says, oh, my finger is misshaped because of how I hold writing utensils. Do you know what? That really isn't that uncommon. I used to have special knives and forks where I'd have to put my fingers, or special pens that are like weird triangle shapes, just because the way I hold things is awkward. It's actually quite painful. Whenever I write letters via hand, I can only probably do about 15 to 30 minutes at a time because genuinely my hands get all red and they like lose the blood in them. I know it said like that. Just hold it lighter. Easier said than done, honestly. Easier said than done. I'm glad that some of you have the same experience. And he just says, I remember spending hours weekly practicing handwriting in notebooks in primary school. Definitely developed some perseverance with all the skills I had to practice. I never really improved. Don't get me wrong, when I was a child, I improved. From young adult onwards, I don't think I've seen any different. I have lots of friends, but also read situations really badly. Friends are complicated. Yeah. As I was saying, with adults, trouble staying organized at home and at work is a really big one. This isn't what we normally put with dyspraxia. Can affect jobs and daily life. A lot of you have already proven that, unfortunately. Getting a job with dyspraxia is more challenging than getting a job without dyspraxia. And social and feeling down may stick around. Depression, remember how we talked about these co-occurring conditions? Unfortunately, it is one. Because as I always say, if you spend your life swimming upstream, it's tiring, you can do it, but it does wear you out eventually. These issues, they are very much still around. They just look different to how they previously were. I just want to get a feel of the room. When were you all born? Because believe it or not, when you were born plays a big impact to how you see certain conditions or how other people may have treated you because of it. Or burnout is real, absolutely. Or my boss told me I wasn't allowed to write things such as labels or cards to people. I always struggled when it came to writing on the boards, writing Christmas cards. I was always a little embarrassed. I just embrace it. It takes a while to get there. We've got most people in the 80s, 70s, 90s. The reason why I ask this is that if we go back to the 60s, dyspraxia wasn't even a thing. 70s, it was a thing, but a lot of negative stigma attached to it. 80s, still quite negative, to be honest, and not really that recognized. And 90s, suddenly people are recognizing it, getting a bit more meaning out of it. I would probably argue not until the 2000s was it something which started to be a bit more common practice and the average person would have heard of. You'll notice the older we go, the more stigma there is. And it means the less people that were diagnosed and the more people didn't want to speak about it. But this didn't mean that it didn't exist. It was always been a thing. We just haven't always acknowledged it or understood it. The next thing is the differences between male and female. Now, when we look at conditions like autism or ADHD, the differences in male and female are a lot more pronounced. We always talk about how women hide it better. Now, is that the true in dyspraxia? Somewhat, but the stats are actually a lot more level. So there isn't really a great difference between male and females. That could also be due to the lack of research, because there really is a lot less research in this area than with others. Katie says, my mum tried to tell people that I was dyspraxic when I was about 4, but I was not officially diagnosed until high school. That is difficult as well, because while I did just say there isn't much difference between male and female, you do tend to find there is still a higher diagnosis rate for males. Males are usually diagnosed more. They have more obvious problems. The way they present are more like red flags, which people will go and then support them. And they often get help faster because issues are noticeable, very similar to ADHD. On the flip side, can be missed for diagnosis, may develop coping strategies. Doesn't that sound like a great thing, coping strategies? It is, but it does mean that you'll probably never get the help because no one's ever going to notice. You may feel more internal struggle, and you might find social and emotional parts of the traits of dyspraxia more difficult. I would say it's not a massive difference between one or the other, but there still is a difference. Here are some symptoms. These are all things which happen in your 40s or mid-age onwards around that time. While they may not directly relate to dyspraxia, having these plus dyspraxia can open a whole hornet's nest of problems you never even thought about. This is one area where people were like, it wasn't an issue, it is an issue because it's now pairing up with something else. For instance, if lack of focus and dyspraxia, not easy. Nausea, insomnia, muscle loss. We've got 2 different types of muscle loss, weight gain. There's a whole heap of things here. Admittedly, I can see why a lot of you would want to click some of them, but they're a fact of life. Knowing that every single thing you have in life is just like having a bag and putting more baggage into it. It's heavier and heavier. Eventually, you just can't carry it any longer. Jamina says, is it true that 50% of people with dyspraxia are autistic? I was told it was on the Asperger's spectrum. I can't say that's true or not. I can say that you are more likely to have autism if you also have dyspraxia, but I don't know if I can say up to 50%. But yeah, can't confirm, but could. Oh yeah, menopause, that is again, there's news in the media lately that menopause should be more widely known as a protected, I don't know if characteristic's the right word, but in terms of discrimination in the workplace and for workplaces having to make reasonable adjustments. The current kind of feeling towards it is just get on with it, don't want to hear about it, but it's part of life and being able to support people with that. Now, with all ND conditions, menopause as well as andropause, the male equivalent, do have a strong connection. And there is research to back this up, even though not much of it. Now, in your own opinions, particularly those who have dyspraxia, did you notice it either getting worse with the older you got, stayed about the same, or do you think it actually got a little bit better? Okay, got worse? Anyone else? Mood-wise, yeah? Maybe it's not even directly comparable. Overwhelmed, yep, okay, the same. This is interesting because maybe it's just because we don't have enough people to make up the numbers, but in other ones, most individuals have said it's gotten worse. Worse is very subjective, but saying maybe they found other elements more noticeable may be more of a fair statement. What are some changes at 40 besides dyspraxia? Any other things that change? Now, this could be any element in life. The reason I ask this is, remember we say dyspraxia quite often isn't the problem. It is all the other things in life with dyspraxia that can make things that are already difficult, that a little bit more difficult, that could be the tipping point. Any other changes? What things do we have to deal with? Not just related to dyspraxia. Dyspraxia probably isn't making it any easier. Teenage children, oh yeah, that's a big one. You're dealing with your own chemical change and you got theirs as well. But I bet they don't care about yours. Older parents, yep, absolutely having to support them in older age. Body problems, the body's breaking down. Health issues, absolutely. While we talked about how women often go unnoticed because they find coping strategies, which is a good thing, those coping strategies may no longer be appropriate when you combine them with all of other life's issues. Then you're in a position where you really genuinely could use support, but there are no support structures in place because you've never needed it previously. Preference is always given to children or teenagers. You can see how it can creep up out of nowhere and can make areas like employment or family life difficult. Who got more responsibility, less friends as have kids, finance, less social support. All of these are absolutely true. Depressing, but true. The next question is, why are these things more difficult? First of all, we've got diagnosis bias in dyspraxia diagnosis. While it's not as pronounced as, say, autism ADHD, there is still bias. There's this thing called female protective effect. It's because how females present their actions, emotions, regardless of whether something is more prevalent. Officially, males are about 4 times more likely to have dyspraxia. Genetically, there are differences. It should be even. What about the women or girls who aren't getting diagnosed? This is a good awareness, can be really helpful. Oh yeah, Kate says not just because women are different, but environmental sexism. Most of these could be avoided if it's societal. Now, if you've never heard of the female protective effect, it's a really interesting look about how women are invisible. This is in all sections of life. When you're a child, you're more passive. On average, you are less likely to get diagnosed. When you're an older woman, you are less likely to be noticed or seen. It's a sad kind of reality, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced it. But this also can relate to diagnosis. Now, there has been a lot of studies on this around ADHD and autism, not much in dyspraxia. Whether or not this can be connected is still open for debate, but I see no reason why they aren't still very much connected. So we know that dyspraxia affects all genders, but we also know that males are more likely to be diagnosed. We know that there is probably a massive underdiagnosis in females, but of course, this is just an assumption at the moment. We know that females may show milder or different symptoms, and this means that they're less likely to get support because they'll be not as high on the priority list. But in older age, these might flip around and then suddenly your symptoms are more challenging than the male counterpart. No one really takes that into consideration. We know that there are individual variations. Everyone is different. Some of the things I mentioned may relate to you, other things may not. Neither of these mean you do or do not have something. If any of this does sound relevant to you, please do not just do our online quiz. Do seek professional support. Now, if you are doing fine in life, getting on, no real trouble, you don't always need to see professional support. You only really need to see it if you notice that there are challenges in life, because it can be a long, drawn-out, expensive process. Women can be biologically different. Well, that's true as well. Again, they can be different in all aspects. At school, I was expected to be good at sports, and because I was bad at sports, they thought we should probably look into this. But maybe girls or women, unfortunately, if we're looking at systemic sexism, there wasn't as much expectations. So you wouldn't really be given the scenarios which the challenges would be as obvious. Yeah, good point on that. If we go back to menopause, because it is a big underexplored area, this is to do with the amount of estrogen or the amount of chemicals in your body. As you can see, you at 35, you reach your max. And then after then, from 40 is when it starts to dip. Even though it continues to dip for the rest of your life, at 40 is when you are probably noticing it for the first time. Symptoms typically worsen. though research is needed on this, particularly with dyspraxia. We also know that there is a lack of guidance. If you genuinely were to Google dyspraxia and menopause, you are not going to find much information at all. It's often really difficult to explain menopause to doctors because they weren't trained on this area. Also, a lot of the symptoms which go along with dyspraxia and menopause aren't officially documented in our diagnostic manuals. It's never going to get picked up unless someone has taken a particular special interest. Doctors aren't overly aware of this area. We think doctors are superheroes, and I think they are mostly, but they can't know everything. This is one area where they are probably going to have significantly less knowledge compared to areas that they deal with on a day in, day out. For some fun history, to look at how we've known about dyspraxia, how we've diagnosed it. Let's go back to the old 60s. 1968, the DSM-2 was published. This document wasn't great. I think this was the manual which said being gay was a disorder. Again, not that trustworthy, but it did mention dyspraxia, though it was very limited. It was like, yeah, dyspraxia, and move on. That wasn't that long ago. In the late 70s, people are finally starting to talk about it. Again, with challenges in how we diagnose, we're continuously moving the bar. There are many people alive today who were brought up in a society which had no reason to know about dyspraxia because it wasn't a thing officially. Also, we know conditions take years and years before they are embedded into society and people actually understand them to a reasonable. Though by the 80s, we were doing research into it and it was being taken more seriously. We've got educational institutions. Oh, yeah, there's like when people went through that phase of an epidemic where every kid had autism or ADHD or dyspraxia. Now, here's a question to those of you who were diagnosed. When were you diagnosed or suspected dyspraxia? And looking at the demographic, it's predominantly women here. This will be quite interesting to know. Were most of you diagnosed younger on or suspected, or was it later on in life? And I do think depending on whether or not it was when you were younger or later life has a big impact in how you internalize it, how you respond to it, and the type of support and information you could expect. We got at 7. Nice. I think I was about I want to say around 3 is when I got diagnosed with mine. However, because I had other conditions, the dyspraxia kind of took a bit of a seat and was never really acknowledged. It was like, oh yeah, you've got that as well, but let's focus on the autism. Actually, probably could have done with a lot of support around the symptoms of dyspraxia. Oh, at 7, but didn't walk until you were 2. That is really common, actually. Thanks for mentioning that. All right, let's have a look, because the correct answer isn't 40, by the way. I had to do a correct answer. Looking at this, interesting. I would say if we had maybe more people, this might balance out a bit more. Just from my personal observations, only based on what I've seen, I find that males are typically diagnosed at around 2 or 3, and women tends to be around 30 to 40, just from the sessions that I've delivered. I do know lots of women who did get diagnosed at a young age, but definitely not as much as I do for all the others. What about later life motivation? Why may someone go through all the effort of getting a late life diagnosis? It's time consuming, it's expensive, you've got other life priorities. Why would you even bother with this? And yet a lot of people do bother with this. This image here, though I personally didn't recognize him, is also an adult with dyspraxia. Okay, validation. I think that is a big one. Helping justify your life experiences to help put things in context makes a lot of sense. Yeah, acceptance, to connect with their children. If your children have something, they can probably maybe feel a bit sad or like, why do I have this thing? But if you say, hey, it's fine, I've got it as well, maybe it can ease some of the pressure off of them. Give them some role models which are actually attainable, because we can't all be Daniel Radcliffe. Get support, boost self-esteem, reconcile the failures, self-compassion. There are so many reasons. They do tend to be more personal and inwards facing than purposely going after additional support, because in the workplace, you should get support regardless of whether or not there is any bit of paper saying you should have it or not. It should just be the standard. That is also backed up via the Equality Act. Just because I say it should be, I live in the real world. I know it's not always or hardly ever, but at least in practice, it should be. Some of the common reasons is to overcome trauma. If you've been brought up your whole life being told you can't do something, that's going to have some emotional baggage. Understanding oneself, the more you know about yourself, the more you can make the best life decisions. Educating, because that's why we're all here today, seeking support, and a recent child diagnosis. Now, this image on the left is some of the ways that we diagnose dyspraxia. It isn't really done just like one way. There's like multiple forms and frameworks which people can use, and depending on your age as well, circumstances. Now, some famous adults with dyspraxia who are 40 onwards, this took a little bit of researching. Richard Branson, I know he's saying, does he have dyslexia? He has said he has dyspraxia, he just doesn't talk about it much. Obviously, the founder of Virgin. Then we've got Emma, the Lewell Buck MP. Other famous folks with dyspraxia is Ian Dale. Is he a political commentator? No? Someone tell me what he is. April says Richard Branson is also said to have ADHD. What is VMI? I don't know. In what context? I don't know what it stands for, but that is one of the criteria books in order to diagnose dyspraxia that professionals will use, as well as the fashion designer. Who else do we have? Oh, David Bailey, who's a very famous photographer. And Susie Dent. Can't remember who Susie Dent is, but I'm assured that these are individuals with dyspraxia. Yes, a lot of creatives, which is interesting. Oh, Daniel Bedingfield. Haven't heard from him in a while. Oh, Countdown. Okay, great stuff. A quote from Daniel Radcliffe, and I appreciate he's not in his 40s, but again, you try finding me a quote from someone in their 40s with dyspraxia. He says, the fact that some things are more of a struggle will only make you more determined, harder working, and more imaginative in the solutions you find to problems. This is a very positive angle to come at. I also find it very uplifting. Oh, what Emma says, Daniel Bedingfield has a new album. I did not know that. NHS, if you're in the UK, you should see your GP. I appreciate it's not going to be a walk in the park. It will be a slow process. It's a good place to start the journey, though. Therapies, you might want to look at occupational. This is like day-to-day living, or speech therapy, because quite often those with dyspraxia may struggle with articulation. Then you've got support groups. Guess arguably this is a support group of some sort. You might have local ones, online groups. These are people who really get it. And because there isn't much official advice out there, these groups can be invaluable. There are special clinics that support dyspraxia in some areas, hard to find. Work and education, you might want to request accommodations. Remember, it's your legal right to be able to do this. You are able to ask regardless of diagnosis. And also websites and organizations like the Dyspraxia Foundation. Here is just some support. Other tools and technologies which might help adults with dyspraxia include calendar apps, which can help with organization. Task apps, again, can keep you on track. Speech-to-text software, while it's predominantly used for those with dyslexia, can also benefit those with dyspraxia. Adaptive keyboard is a bit funny looking, and it's because of the awkward way we rest or hold things, it can cause a lot of stress, like we talked about with writing over time. You might have a mouse which is more ergonomic, which can be helpful. Smart pens, these are pens which turn your written text into digital text, which can help those who might struggle with handwriting. A smartwatch can, every time you've got a meeting coming up, which can help you stay on track. It can also monitor your steps to making sure you get enough exercise, because there is probably a link between struggling with physical activities to doing less of them. GPS navigation, a lot of people with dyspraxia do struggle with getting lost. These are just some tools which may help you. For some of these, at least, there are alternatives or very low-cost solutions. Other areas which I find helpful is looking at YouTube. Let's look at a spinny wheel of some YouTubers I may recommend. Oh, look, our own channel. You should check it out. Funny, who put that there? What are other YouTubers? If any of you do watch YouTube, or who doesn't, we've also got Michelle. Maybe I spelt it wrong, or maybe that's right. Michelle B. She doesn't particularly focus on dyspraxia, does do a lot of life vlogs, which are very helpful, and she touches upon a lot of the challenges that a lot of people with dyspraxia do face. We've also got How to ADHD, and you're like, nah, that's ADHD, you fool. There aren't any how to dyspraxia things. Honestly, not much information at all. Yet this channel is really helpful, and I would find a lot of the support strategies that they speak about would also be beneficial for dyspraxia. If anyone else has any more, let me know. Dyspraxia Foundation, though not predominantly a YouTube channel, they do upload some good content from time to time. We've got Therapy in a Nutshell. This is a good site. We give you an overview on some strategies which can help you take charge of your own life. Again, not looking at dyspraxia in particular, but still relevant and would be useful. Other support areas is this book, Living with Dyspraxia. It's a bit old now, but it's still been quite a useful foundation, which worth a little glance over, called Living with Dyspraxia, A Guide for Adults with Developmental Dyspraxia by Mary Colley. Oh, there are quite a few from Exceptional Individuals. Nice. Some journal articles. Now, I appreciate not everyone's going to be into reading these articles because they're not super accessible. But if you are interested in learning more about dyspraxia, what you can do is find these articles online, copy them, and paste them into some AI like ChatGPT type program and say, give me an overview. You can still get the same information, just in a little bit more digestible, easy to manage format. Do check them out. We've got the rehabilitation of adults with dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and ADHD in adults, diagnosis, cognitive assessments for adults with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and ADHD, dyspraxia and autistic traits in adults and without autism spectrum condition, a comprehensive study of the relationship between I don't know what that is, verbal dyspraxia in adults and children, but there are some really good stuff out there. There are some good articles. If any of you are currently in work, there is support you can get for dyspraxia. This is through having a workplace needs assessment. Just go on our website. You can sign up to it. If you're in the UK, in work, it's completely free for you. You might as well give it a little look out. This is just called Workplace Needs Assessment, and the government scheme is called Access to Work. Well, next webinar, high functioning autism is outdated term, by the way. A lot of people still use it. We're going to be going into the history of it. What does it mean? How do you talk about that type of autism currently? It'll be quite useful. We also have a dyspraxia Facebook group where you can chat to like-minded people. A couple of trolls, but nothing too bad at the moment. If you have any tips or suggestions, please do share. Oh, nice site for this one. Oh, okay, I'm almost done. Here's a YouTube channel if you want to look at our previous videos on dyspraxia. We have a whole heap of them. You can just go on our site, click on the search bar, dyspraxia, and you'll see we have a whole load of dyspraxia content, which is quite a lot considering there isn't really that much online. If you still want to get in contact after all of this and I haven't scared you off, just go on our website, exceptionalindividuals.com, or drop us an email at admin@accept.co.uk. Okay, another Thursday done and dusted. I hope you found that interesting, useful, enlightening. While there isn't much research in this area, it still doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it, because hopefully it might open the doors for more people to get involved and to have a study in this area. See you next week. It'll be a good one, and a very popular one at that. Bye all.